Thank you for joining this session where I get to be the messenger to the team's great work in accomplishing an amazing migration. Actually, there's been a single thread that's been common among all the leaders and the decision makers that I've been talking with in the past week, and that is that there's always one thing that leads up to the decision and one thing that leads up to the catalyst to be able to actually make the decision to move to cloud. And for us, this was it. It was a moment of clarity when our head of IT delivered this message to me. And funny enough, my 5-year-old son at home, he came to me and he saw this slide. He said, "Oh my gosh, Daddy, what happened?" And I said, don't worry, Daddy's not going to let that happen." So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about all the decisions that led up to us migrating to cloud and why we decided on Google Cloud. We're going to talk about our initial plans. And you know what? Things change. So we're also going to talk about what actually really happened. Just a reminder for the folks that don't know Volusion, we are an all-in-one commerce platform. We're a SaaS platform, and we are the only ones in the industry that are focused on SMBs. And the Small Business Administration defines SMBs in many different ways, and the one fact, or the metric that stands out to me, is the fact that SMBs make generally less than 50 million annually. Those are our customers. At the heart of everything that we do is our culture code. And in fact, we reinvented it a couple years ago. And one of the most important slides in our culture code that drives every decision we make is that question, what's in it for the customer? And if you saw PH's session yesterday about being the customer, that's what we're talking about here. And if you wanted to check out more on our culture code, please go to culture.volusion.com. Hopefully it influences you like we were influenced to create it in the first place. Just a point of clarity, we actually have two offerings for Volusion. We have what we refer to internally as V1 and V2. So V2 is modern in the cloud. It's our new offering. But for the purposes of this session, we're going to focus on V1. What is V1? It's software that's been pretty much in development since 1999. It's got a lot of code. It's predominantly Windows, IIS, Microsoft SQL Server. And the team over the years has figured out how to orchestrate and how to put customers on different segments and different groupings of IIS and database, depending on the volume that they get. So some merchants get more traffic than others. And the isolation the team's figured out over the years. As an example, we actually have pretty huge traffic spikes for certain customers. In fact, over a 2 or 3 day period, we experience very heavy loads, and we call that period Black Friday, where our merchants get a lot of shopper traffic. So let's talk about why cloud and why Google Cloud. So here's a picture. Actually, this is misleading. We had Data Center 0.1, which is the founder's bedroom closet. This is Volusion Data Center 1.0. And one thing that you're going to notice is single points of failure. Single CPU, single network, single disk. And this is actually a closet in one of the offices. But we evolved. We learned, we got better. And we went to a co-location in Simi Valley, California. But you still see the same problems. Single points of failure, single deadbolt security to get in, single network, single power. So the team invested in a Tier 4 co-location, and that's based in Austin, Texas. And it's phenomenal. The security is amazing. The redundancy on power and cooling is amazing. And in fact, the initial proposal from the team was let's move everything from Simi Valley, California to this Tier 4 co-location. And what that would mean is sometimes you'd have to buy a bunch of hardware so that you can move over the customers, and most of the apps can come over, but you might also have to acquire some software along the way. And then I had to ask myself, which is a question that some of you here might be asking yourselves, which is, should we be in the data center business? Or what value would our customers get from us being in the data center business? So we dug into the facts, and I found out something really interesting, that over 50% of our failures were the result of hardware or the interconnectivity between that hardware within the data center. We call that network. So we started to go to all the calculators on all the major cloud platforms, and we started to scope out what does it look like how much is it going to cost for us to move over to the cloud? And initial savings could have been somewhere around 20 to 21%. So that sounded good. That's money that we can use for R&D for our customers. We could repurpose that. But how do you know which cloud to use? Right? There's so many choices. There's the big three, and there's tons more. So it's really hard to make that decision. How do you choose which one's right for you? Everyone has a selection process. Every company has their own mechanisms and frameworks. For us, it was really simple. We would get a bunch of proposals from all the vendors and all the cloud providers. We would spend some time evaluating. We would do a proof of concept, perhaps, during that evaluation, and then we would make a decision. And what happened was phenomenal. The best conversations that we had were with the Google Cloud team. In fact, I'll give you an example. We had a major networking constraint that we had to discuss, and in 24 hours, we as a team got on a hangout with the team at Google Cloud that built the infrastructure, the networking infrastructure on Google Cloud, and they were able to answer our questions directly. And as another reference, one of the other cloud providers, not to be named, sent us to a vendor who got back to us in 2 weeks. It took 2 weeks just to get back to us to have a phone call. So now we're kind of settling on Google Cloud. What's our initial plan going to be? How do we actually do that? It's starting to sound like it could fit. Once again, that all-important question that we ask, what's in it for the customer? And uptime is perhaps one of the most important things. Our customers are SMBs. These are small, medium businesses. These are moms and pops. And if we go down, they can't make money to pay their mortgage, their employees. Sometimes this is their only business, is an online e-commerce store. So if we can eliminate hardware failures in that graph I showed you, we'd get closer to even more nines than 99.9. And we can scale on demand, so we can deal with that traffic that spikes during Black Friday. Having everybody on a homogeneous development environment, IT, engineering, the data teams, the ops teams, would be powerful. And we'd be able to speed up development times having access to the same tools. And this would benefit the customer because we'd get products shipped to them a lot faster. Speaking of faster, some of the case studies on Google Cloud, actually showed us that people are benefiting from the globally available network that Google has, and we felt we could be faster. The network could be faster just by moving over. There's so many other benefits. I'm sure you've read about them, heard about them in this Next and last year's Next and all the collateral. The one thing that stood out to us was the access that we would get to the Google Cloud platform teams. And by the way, when we started diving a little bit deeper with the Google Cloud platform team, we started to see a little bit better cost to serve reduction. So the estimates were about 33% now that we would save on monthly cost to serve that we can reinvest in R&D. So which migration approach is right for us? Right? There's so many different ones. These are the 3 core ones that we were kind of dabbling in and making a decision on. And on the far left, there's the cloud native approach, which is kind of a complete rewrite to match Google Cloud Platform tools and technology. All the way on the right, it's a little bit less work, but similar. You leverage the cloud native aspects. Both of those that I just mentioned are pretty high effort and high cost up front, but the savings are huge. And in the middle, there's this thing called lift and shift. And lift and shift just means move over as much as you can with minimal modification. And that's what we decided to choose. We went with lift and shift. And what that meant is if we had an app server sitting in our co-location in our data center somewhere, we would spin up an exact instance like that in GCP and move it over. And we would only write code or make changes if it didn't work, if there was impediments. So that's cool. We're going to do a lift and shift. But how do you actually do that? So other people say it usually better than I can. In this case, Benjamin Franklin said it best. Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I remember. And involve me and I learn. And that last sentence is what's really important to us as a company. When you involve the teams, when you get buy-in, when you get that learning, then everybody's actually going to help move this thing forward quicker. And in fact, the way that we decided to learn up front was to engage the experts. And at the time that we decided to do this, we engaged Google. They had a program called Google Cloud Start, and they brought in their experts to do infrastructure and architecture planning and show us, this is how you do it. And we got to learn from them. And speaking of learning, there was a lot of ways that we could decide to learn and choose to learn, and we took advantage of every single one of these ways. So we engaged professional services, once again, the experts that have done this before. We had workshops on-site and virtual for the teams. We had on-site training, and sometimes we had classes of 25 or more people, Volusioneers, in those training sessions learning about different technologies that GCP has to offer. And at the time that we did this, there were no case studies. There was no other examples of any other companies that have done this before. So we were kind of pioneering a way for a SaaS platform, SaaS e-commerce company, to move over all these customers with minimal downtime. And we had a pretty accelerated timeline to do that. We spent about 1 quarter making the decision and planning. We spent another quarter actually doing the migration itself. We spent a couple months flipping over the bits to get the customers live. And then now we're in this phase where we call modernization, where we're trying to take advantage of cloud-native technologies. And I find it remarkable that last year we were attendees to this conference, and this year we're talking about how we actually did it. That's a fantastic achievement by the team. So that was the plan. So what actually really happened? Problem number 1. Because we host thousands of websites that need certificates, there was no technology that Google had natively, cloud native, to be able to host and do SSL termination on those certificates. So this was the first problem, and we have over 50,000 of them. And the proposal that we had approached during the Cloud Start phase was a hybrid traffic layer using Nginx. And if you don't know what Nginx is, it's a reverse proxy layer or an HTTP layer that you can add in. So we would still leverage some of the cloud load balancer aspects of Google, but we'd build this layer in between called Nginx. And that would handle the SSL hosting and the termination across all the other layers, all the way to the store resolution. I think we had to rebuild this a few times, but eventually this is what we settled on. And we internally refer to this as the 3-layer cake. It's a combination of Google Cloud at the top with Google Cloud load balancers and Nginx spread through the middle. What's fantastic about this is that different teams across the company can focus on their respective layers. For example, InfoSec can focus on the security layer. And because it's abstracted out this way, they usually don't impact the other layers. The app engineering team can focus on the bottommost layer. Problem number 2. At the time that we were going to do this migration, we had 2 DNS servers, and we knew that that was going to be a bottleneck. And the solution here was Google Cloud DNS. And in fact, to our surprise, the day that we cut over our DNS to Google Cloud DNS, we saw a 15% improvement in first byte response time on average across all of our customer sites. So that was a fantastic win. Problem number 3. Once again, because we are hosting all these websites, there's thousands of small files, CSS, JavaScript, images, flat files, HTML files, plus the database. How do you move all those over with minimal downtime? We actually leveraged a combination of CloudEndure and our internal scripts. And CloudEndure has a product called Live Migration, where it'll constantly do continuous replication from our data center over to Google Cloud, and only when we're ready would it actually do the cutover. So this was a fantastic tool. A little bit deeper dive on that. This is how we did it every single night with minimal maintenance window and minimal downtime for our customers. So we would update the DNS record to point to the new Google Cloud DNS. We'd move all the files. We'd update the Nginx layer that we talked about. We'd move any last pieces of the database. and then the customer would be live. We did this all with a 5 to 15 minute maintenance window per customer or per cluster of customers. So that was how we did it every single night. And I believe it took us about 2.5, 3 weeks to get through these nightly migrations. So I'd love to also share some of the successes and the learnings we had along the way. Sometimes code just doesn't work. And in fact, we had over 100 Jira tickets that we had filed before the migration, and there was some issues that we didn't catch along the way. But I'll give you an example of what you'd look for. Anything hard-coded IP, anything hard-coded server names, anything hard-coded file shares, those are things that we would have to change. We thought that by using multi-region that we would be closer to the shoppers and we'd be closer to the merchants, but that didn't necessarily work out the right way. Because of the way that Windows likes to route traffic, and Nginx likes to route traffic, and Linux likes to route traffic, that kind of diversity caused saturation at the WAN layer, and we had unpredictable traffic patterns. And by going to a single region, and we settled on central, we were able to get consistent performance and predictable performance. And then later, the team can decide on how to tweak and tune that to make it faster. And in fact, here's one of the tweaks that they did. So Nginx by default, it goes to HTTP 1.0, which is stateless. By turning on HTTP 1.1 persistent connections, once again, with no code changes, we were able to deliver another 50% first byte improvement on top of that 15% I mentioned earlier. So 50% improvement on first byte, no code change. We had a challenge on migration latency, basically moving all those thousands of files over. Over the years, we've built all these scripts and tools to be able to shuffle customers around in our internal data center infrastructure. And we just kind of thought that they would work. All these scripts would work if we pointed the destination, to cloud, and they didn't. And that's where CloudEndure came in. Some other things that were pretty remarkable happened along the way, too. Because we had training and learning and workshops at Volusion, other teams caught a glimpse of what the power of GCP is. And in this case, the marketing team, they learned what all about Nginx, and they decided to use Nginx for A/B testing our www.volusion.com site. And there's a lot of A/B testing tools out there, but what we're trying to do is pretty unique. We had a rebrand effort, and sometime during the migration, these tools came about, and we were able to split traffic from our classic non-branded site to the new branded site without redirecting anyone to a new context path. That means everybody stayed on www.volusion.com. They didn't go to /B or /A. And it was pretty smart. This layer in between would check the URI string, it would check query string, it would check cookies, and it would persist that user to that particular A/B test. So this was a great win. And the marketing team also decided to use buckets and Ghost to host the blog. So our previous version of the blog was actually pretty slow. And we didn't realize it until we realized how fast it was once we moved it over to GCP. But once we did move it over to Google Cloud, and we took advantage of Cloud CDN, this thing was blazing fast. And it's gone through a few more iterations now, but it's definitely a win to mention here. So as I mentioned, first byte response times have improved for our customers by 65% with no code change. And we have been able to save even more money than we originally forecasted. That's money that we can spend on product development and R&D. So right now, we're saving 37% month over month on our cost to serve, and we feel like we're going to keep going down that path of saving more money. And what's in it for the customer? Here's a quote from one of our customers. Derek operates a sporting goods store. It's a paintball store called A&S Gear. The quote is actually really long here. I'm going to call attention to the parts that you can't see, which is the fact that for the first time ever, he was able to run a marketing promotion 100% on our platform without seeing any degradation in performance of his response time on his site. And historically, site traffic goes up. Even a half-second latency causes sales to not go up or maybe even dip. That didn't happen on GCP at all. So this is a fantastic win for the customer. and kind of you got to take a step back and celebrate sometimes. Celebrate your wins as a company, and we got a chance to do that both publicly and internally. We got to celebrate being the first to migrate to cloud, and we had a big party internally to celebrate the achievement. So if you only have to remember one thing from this presentation, it's that whatever decision you make, whether you want to move to cloud, whether you're already on the cloud, you should ask yourself, what's in it for the customer? And if you can remember a couple things, it's that learning and persistence and perseverance is how you get there. Because there was so many times that we could give up. So many times it's easy to say, no, we're not going to do that right now. We're just going to go to a colo and call it a day. But it's that perseverance attitude that's going to get you there. So thank you so much. We have created an email address for any questions